everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, and welcome to the very first It Came From England episode filmed at my new place. So if you guys didn't see any of my community updates recently, or the last update video I did, I said I was going to be moving to a new place, and, you know, here I am. I do apologize that this episode was pretty late, because I originally planned on uploading this on Wednesday, but due to technical difficulties with the new place, I wasn't able to, like, be able to, watch whatever I'm going to be reviewing in order for me to do this review. You guys know what I'm saying. Today we're going to be talking about Doctor Who story number 6. It has been quite a while since we've talked about, Doctor Who on this series. But yeah, we're going to be taking a look at what a lot of people kind of consider to be like the one of the best pure historical episodes in the show's history. And this was the very first Doctor Who story I ever watched, and we're going to be looking at the Aztecs. So as I mentioned, this was the very first Doctor Who story I ever saw, but this obviously wasn't my introduction to Doctor Who, as my introduction to the entire Doctor Who franchise was thanks to LEGO Dimensions, and, after, playing that game, and, honestly, in my opinion, like, one of the best, like, levels in the story mode was the Doctor Who level, and, I'm like, judging from what I've seen in LEGO Dimensions, this show looks interesting. And literally a few months after, LEGO Dimensions came out, I was browsing through Netflix, and, I saw they had both classic Doctor Who and modern Doctor Who on Netflix, and I'm like, wow, alright, time for me to give this show a shot. So I looked through the classic series, and the classic series, they had, like, a select few stories from, because, there's a lot of classic Who, and plus not all of it's available, of course. And they had, like, select stories from each Doctor, and for the first Doctor, they had the Aztecs available, so that was, how I watched it. I was introduced to Doctor Who thanks to this story, and yeah, I watched, Doctor Who, throughout that day, but then literally the next day, they got rid of Doctor Who from Netflix, and yeah, I was pretty pissed about that. You see, everybody, this right here is why, physical media will always be, kind of, more important in my opinion than, like, streaming. Obviously, we're not talking about David Tennant, of course, but, I'm just showing an example. But, yeah, that was how I was introduced to the Aztecs, and just Doctor Who as a whole. Honestly, that's probably the one thing I'll thank LEGO Dimensions for, was introducing me to Doctor Who, so there's that, I guess. But enough about my little history lesson about, my introduction to, the show and, this particular story. Let us actually talk about the Aztecs itself. So, the story starts off, with the TARDIS crew arriving in Mexico in the 15th century, and they ended up in a tomb, and Barbara was, like, looking through, like, all the different relics in there, and, she had, like, some sort of snake bracelet around her, and, eventually she was caught by, like, the guards in that area, and, she was mistaken as, like, a reincarnation of, the ancient high priest, Yatexa. And, of course, she, assumes, this identity and, kind of sticks with it throughout the story. With her, new position and power, Barbara believes that, she can, put an end to, human sacrifice. And she does, of course, see the good side of the Aztec culture, by, a man by the name of Audlock, played by Keith Pyatt, who was basically the high priest of knowledge, and, was pretty much throughout the story, like, the, the most supportive Aztec member of, Barbara, who was, obviously mistaken as Yatexa. And then, of course, there was the other side of the coin, one person in the story who was, heavily against her from beginning to end, and, speculated, that she was not, actually Yatexa, which, of course, he was right. And that was, of course, the High Priest of Sacrifice, Latoxel, I think is how you pronounce his name. I might have butchered that, but, he was played by John Rainham. Since Barbara, as I've, mentioned way back in Unearthly Child, she was a history teacher, she saw, like, how advanced, their culture really was, and, and believes that, sacrifice, should be abolished, and that they would be spared of destruction at the hands of the Spanish. However, the first Doctor, of course, warns Barbara about, like, changing, history, and, affecting, human sacrifice, as, you know, that was pretty much, you know, the Aztecs, you know, way of life. So as I mentioned earlier, Latoxel begins to suspect that Barbara, of course, is not Yatexa, and, you know, especially because, you know, she, you know, banned, you know, human sacrifice. So throughout the entire story, he sets, like, you know, a series of, like, you know, traps for both her and, you know, the rest of the Doctor's, you know, companions. So one main example is that, you know, he had Ian be, you know, part of the Aztec military, and, you know, he had to fight, you know, the strongest warrior in that military by the name of Ixta. I think that's how you pronounce his name. His name is spelled I-X-T-A. I do apologize if I mispronounce any of these guys' names. And of course, you know, Ian had to fight, you know, the guy to you know, in control of, like, you know, who could control the Aztec forces. Throughout the story, this guy developed a grudge against Ian and, you know, was used by Latoxel to try and prove that, like, you know, Barbara was not the Aztec god that they thought she is. And the Doctor, of course, unwittingly, I cannot talk today, tells, you know, the opponents about how to defeat Ian in combat using a drugging, you know, agent. And, of course, this battle, you know, nearly ends in the Doctor witnessing, you know, Ian's death, but of course, you know, this fails, and, you know, Latoxel convinces, you know, the priest by the name of Tanilla to, you know, make a poison for Barbara. The death of Barbara following the consumption of the poison, you know, of course, would prove that she was not immortal and she was just a normal person, and therefore not a god. However, you know, Ian quietly warns her through, like, you know, hand signals not to drink it, and she, you know, refuses to drink the poison, and of course, you know, admits to Latoxel that she was not Yatexa, and, you know, warns the guy to not tell everybody else in the community. So, during the course of the story, both Susan and the Doctor were involved in, like, kind of little minor subplots that, you know, kind of related to, you know, marriage-making scenarios. For Susan's case, she was transgressed by Aztec law by refusing to marry another person because, you know, she was heavily against, you know, arranged marriage. She believed that marriage was only for, you know, your own choosing. And funny enough, the same person that she was supposed to get married to was, you know, the same person who was supposed to be sacrificed, but Barbara refused it. And then in the Doctor's case, you know, who was very familiar with, like, you know, the way the Aztecs, you know, behaved and were accustomed to, accidentally became engaged to, you know, an Aztec woman by the name of Kameka. And after they shared, you know, a cup of cocoa together. And also she helped the Doctor and Ian, you know, find a way to re-enter the tomb because, you know, when they got out, they weren't able to get back in. So she was able to help them, you know, find a way to get back into the tomb, which was where the TARDIS was. And Ian, you know, after him and the Doctor, you know, found the entrance, the secret entrance to the tomb, you know, Ian goes through, and, you know, he was almost, you know, drowned while, you know, while he was in the tomb, and, you know, he was eventually able to find his way out, and, you know, was able to get into the room that the TARDIS was in, and, you know, was able to, like, you know, get everybody, you know, aware that, like, you know, hey, there's a way to get into the tomb without doing it the hard way, I guess. And then despite, you know, throughout the story, despite, you know, Barbara's efforts into, like, you know, trying to change, you know, the Aztec, you know, culture, she realized that she can, you know, completely change it, and, you know, even though she did succeed in, you know, changing the views of Outlook, he did help, you know, Barbara reunite with, you know, everybody else, you know, before exiling himself to a desert to meditate on, you know, what remains of his faith. And then eventually, near the very end of the story, you know, while everybody was trying to, you know, get back into the tomb, you know, Ian had one more fight with, you know, the one guy from earlier that tried to fight him. Ian eventually succeeded, unintentionally. And so the Doctor and his companions were able to get back into the tomb, and, yeah, they were able to, you know, escape. And, you know, now that, you know, everybody was gone, and, you know, Latoxel was, you know, able to, do his sacrificing without any, you know, interference from, you know, anybody else. And then while they were on their way back to whatever they were going to next, Barbara was upset that, like, you know, she couldn't, like, you know, stop the human sacrifices, but, you know, the doctor, you know, comforts her by, you know, saying that, you know, she did help, you know, Alok, you know, find a better belief system, and, you know, made her aware that she, at least, you know, made some sort of contribution. And so that was about it for the Aztecs. Was it as good as I remembered? I mean, for the most part, it's, definitely not a bad story. It, you know, has, you know, a lot of great things going on in it. You know, I honestly really like the way that, you know, they've kind of, you know, made, like, you know, different subplots for, like, you know, all the main characters, and, that, of course, eventually, by the end, you know, intertwine with one another. I especially kind of like how this, you know, story kind of gave, you know, Barbara in particular, you know, a lot more, screen time, and, you know, kind of gave her, you know, more character growth, I guess. And, you know, honestly, I feel like this story, you know, definitely, you know, solidifies my opinion about, like, you know, why, in my opinion, Barbara was, like, such a great companion of the series. Ian's subplot in the episode was, you know, was kind of interesting, you know, kind of, you know, going head-to-head with, like, you know, one of the strongest warriors in the Aztec, you know, forces. Although, surprisingly, Susan's role was kind of, you know, the least, what do you call it, the least important, I guess you would say. But at least the good news is she wasn't, like, you know, very annoying or anything, you know. There weren't very many moments in the story where, like, Susan was just, you know, like, you know, irritating to listen to, you know. A lot of previous stories, she was usually either screaming or, like, you know, overreacting to a lot of things. And, you know, there weren't really any moments in the Aztecs where she was like that, you know. I honestly kind of give Susan some praise for that. This was probably, you know, one of the few times where she, you know, wasn't, you know, very overdramatic, I guess, you know. If you guys haven't seen my previous reviews, you guys know I wasn't really a big fan of Susan as a character. But yeah, it was definitely, you know, a pretty interesting story. The guest cast was nice. They definitely did a pretty good job. I do kind of like how, very, you know, the way that John Reno plays, you know, the role of... I'm never gonna get this guy's name right. Latoxel. You know, kind of the guy, you know, the priest of sacrifice. You know, I liked the way his character was portrayed, you know, sort of like, almost like, you know, a stereotypical, like, you know, cheesy villain in a way. Which I guess sort of makes sense when you really think about it, because, you know, back in the day, you know, Doctor Who was kind of like, you know, not only just geared towards families, but, like, you know, also, you know, the historical episodes were kind of like, you know, a teaching tool for kids, and, you know, I guess, you know, that kind of explains why, you know, his character was, you know, kind of goofy in a way. Not, like, you know, really goofy in a way, but, like, you know, kind of like a stereotypical, like, you know, putting your hands together kind of villain, as I would probably put it. But yeah, I think overall this is, like, a really strong story. I definitely can see why a lot of people say it's one of the best. Do I think it really holds up as, like, being one of the best of all time? Not necessarily, but I do like, you know, a lot of the things that was going on in the story, and, you know, being that it was the very first Doctor Who story I ever saw, you know, it holds a special place for me. And, you know, I think for those reasons alone, I'm going to give the Aztecs a rating of 8 out of 10. And that is about it for this episode of It Came From England. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, feel free to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of It Came From England, or just mediocre plush content in general. By the way, something I kind of want to bring up, in this video before I end it. So there's this YouTuber I've been, you know, that I've noticed has been, like, quite a big fan of the It Came From England series. I think his name goes by, you know, Poseidon something. Let me look up his name real quick. So the guy's name is Poseidon God of Water 20 Productions. I noticed that he, you know, he's done, like, several videos, talking about, like, my content, and, you know, while I appreciate it, you know, it's really nice, in his, Plants vs. Zombies Plushified video, he, his outro, for whatever reason, is, like, you know, way too similar to the outro of, you know, my It Came From England series, and I don't know, I kind of have, I I kind of have a bit of a problem with that. I don't know how I feel about it. Honestly, if you're watching this, I'm honestly kind of hoping you would, you know, maybe do your own outro. I don't know. I don't really feel the most comfortable, you know, people kind of, you know, sort of using my outro word for word, I guess. But yeah, if you can, you know, change that, that would be much appreciated if you're watching this, which I'm sure you are. But anyways, I just want to get that out of the way. Besides that, leave a comment down below, let me know what you think about this, and yeah, that's about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. And for the next episode of It Came From England, which of course would be the Season 5 finale, I'm going to be finishing off talking about Classic Who by doing an overview of the last Classic Doctor. So, stay tuned.